Hello and welcome back to part 2 of this special double edition of The Conversation. My name's Graham and I'm based in Manchester.
And I'm Malika and I'm in Norwich.
Well, Malika, so should we just get straight on with it? I mean, last time we talked very briefly about cultural racism and how it impacts society and the workplace. And we started to talk very briefly about unconscious biases, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Towards the end of our interview with our great guest, Adrian Rollins, we discussed a little bit about this idea of unconscious bias. And the examples that Adrian gave were very powerful. The idea that a group of young Black people can somehow be perceived as threatening or disturbing or disruptive. I find a group like that having fun just great, and I look at them with a big smile. And perhaps that's a bias I hold because I'm not fearful, but it's actually interesting to explore that a bit deeper, isn't it?
Now, I think Adrian's still on the line, so should we welcome him back in?
Yeah, sure thing. Adrian, are you here? Hi.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi. Nice to see you again.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome back. So earlier on, we were kind of like discussing when I was using my example of being seen as an angry woman because I've got an opinion, and really being a brown woman with an opinion is kind of like frowned upon. You can't have an opinion, and if you do and you say something, you're belligerent. I've been told I was belligerent and I was angry. What, for holding an opinion and not taking some rubbish from people? Really, what's that all about? Can you talk to us about unconscious bias and the things that you may have experienced yourself, Adrian?
Yeah. The funny thing about unconscious bias is I struggle with that. It seems a bit of an oxymoron, because how can you be biased and not know it? But then I would probably say ignorant bias more than unconscious. But in terms of bias in itself, we have protected characteristics in the UK. We have the Equalities Act, and it's funny when we talk about. We talked about the Equality, or we made reference to it earlier about the Equalities Act, but how many people actually know what's in it? And also like the Disabilities Act, how many people know what's in it? And how many people can actually name the protected characteristics? Race is one of them. Gender is another one. You know, it's there. So we have it. And also if we look at within education system, we have British values in inverted commas, which is supposed to be promoted and taught in schools, and probably should be taught everywhere. I mean, people can discuss, why are they British and not just values and just core values, which everybody should have. Again, but that's for another discussion. But in terms of unconscious bias, yeah, I've been there. My general disposition, although perhaps my children might think otherwise, is that I'm generally quite positive, and I'm not probably one of the first people to wear a smile. And then when I'm not doing that, or if I have an opinion that is different from others, which people would sometimes have a problem with that, and it's almost like, well, oh, I didn't realize you were like that. And that's, they won't necessarily phrase it in that way. They won't necessarily say that word for word verbatim, but they'll phrase it in that way. And that for me is like, well, what's that supposed to mean? So if you speak up, or if you speak up, and I do speak up around things that matter to me, I do speak up if I believe something is not fair and unjust. The chip on your shoulder kind of reference comes out. The behavior that, the look of shock and surprise, and that kind of blame thing with, you get these things all the time. It's funny how people would often come and ask me, because they think, oh, well, you're educated and you've made it. Why is it that there's so much black on black crime? Why do you think there's so many single fathers? Why do you think? And they're asking me as if I'm going to say, well, actually, yeah, that's right. There is too much black and black crime. There's crime on crime. And, where there's an area where it's densely populated with black people and there's crime, there'll be black and black crime, just as there'll be that where there's densely populated with white people, there'll be white and white crime. But no one's going to scream that, because if you look at the data, crime is crime. And to me, it's not necessarily exclusive to a particular group. But that's where unconscious bias comes in, because people believe what they're fed, unfortunately, even though we're in this information age, and won't do the research themselves and do real research to actually go and find out the truth, because it doesn't suit whatever narrative that they have in their head.
I mean, I agree with both of you in terms of how people make assumptions about people, and we talk about unconscious bias, but in a way it's also making stereotypes about certain areas. So through my experiences, you know, people will make, because I'm a gay man, or sometimes I can be quite flamboyant, people make assumptions about me in terms of the way I live my life or the way I can behave in work or outside of work. And it's just, I'm so far away from a stereotype, it's unreal. I mean, Malika, you know me better than most people. So it's a case of, it's like you said, Adrian, people make assumptions. So if you're like, so I've got, I think it's very similar to yours, Adrian, where, you know, you behave in a way that's not to your norm, shall we say. So obviously at work, obviously I'm a line manager for people, and obviously because I'm quite a fun, happy chappy kind of, you know, just living how it goes. But when you have to kind of bring someone in, actually have a conversation with them about, you know, you're doing something naughty or performance or whatever, my persona flips in terms of that, and people go, oh, I didn't expect you to do that. I'm like, well, why not? But just because I'm a happy chappy doesn't mean I'm also not being able to hold my tone when I need to. So, Malika, I think, you know, you talked about that people thought you were belligerent, but I wouldn't think that in a million years. I see an impassioned person and they're impassioned about different ideas and different ways and how we should all live. So
yeah.
it's just very frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And then obviously they place these labels on you, and the sheer hypocrisy of it all is when it starts denying your basic rights, when you start having limitations, and your basic rights or basic right to be who you are is kind of like denied. And that's happened to me on many occasions in the workplace, for example, where I was attributed as someone who's belligerent because I was challenging things that weren't right, you know. And you do, because like Adrian says, there's something that you see that is not right, you're going to speak up about it, and you are going to say you don't agree with it. But there are other ways that unconscious bias has presented itself. You know, for example, if I start speaking, one day I was speaking and I was told, that I do speak not in a posh way, but, you know, just because I pride myself of being educated, I make no apologies for striving for excellence and not looking at mediocrity as a parameter of who I want to be. And I look up, I don't look down. And that's been the sort of thing that's been said to me. And it's like, why? Because women like me can't be like that. I mean, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to speak in a way that's going to suit your perception of who I am? And that's what we mean by unconscious bias. You know, the stereotypes that people hold against groups of people and individuals with protected characteristics that are going to make them act in ways that are unfair and unjust and discriminate ultimately these groups of people. So as Adrian says, I agree with the unconscious. I think there is a big level of consciousness in that. I agree with you, Adrian. I agree that no one chooses to be ignorant all their lives. And especially now, with the level of awareness that we have in society, with the many lived experiences and people speaking up about these experiences, I think it becomes somehow, I believe, a choice to remain ignorant to those things and to refuse to learn to change yourself, because it's got to come from you. You've got to change yourself. I know I held biases. Everyone does, but I've made the work on myself to change those and to become a better person. And I believe that personally, things should be the onus should be put on individuals, perhaps, to hold that responsibility a bit more. I don't know whether that rings a bell with you folks, but this is where I'm at now.
No, I completely agree with you. And, you know, I mentioned earlier in the first part of this episode where intersectionality, and, you know, we're all given a label and people focus on that one particular label. But, you know, as you know, all three of us, our commonality is the fact that we've been with the Open University. You know, so I've designed an intersectionality training course with the Open University to kind of say, well, actually, you know, here is an outline of you know, we call it the gender bread, and make some assumptions, you know, and that's how we deal with unconscious bias, you know, by opening up a conversation to say, right, you're making assumptions about this person. We don't know anything about them, and it's all on face value. Now, Adrian, you know, let's bring you back in here in terms of obviously working in the education sector. You know, how do you deal with intersectionality and kind of enabling people to explore themselves? Because you work in a high school, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I work in a secondary school. I think The funny thing, I don't know, funny, weird, or the funny thing I find in, say, for example, many schools that I've worked in, the young people generally within schools are far more open to what people's backgrounds are than previously. Because I think when I went to school, I grew up in East London, and when I went to school, just being any kind of different was a problem. It just really was, whatever you determine different to be, because that word in itself is a problem for me. But if you were not fitting into a category which the majority fitted into, there was a problem. Now, in the schools that I've worked in, amongst the students, apart from the moments where you have students who are just overtly prejudiced and have that because they're clearly getting it from home, it's you know, because you're not going to have, very unlikely you're going to have a 12, 13-year-old young person watching, I don't know, a certain news channel in America or whatever, and getting their information from there. But they are really open. I recall working at a school where a young person declared that they were transgender, changed their dress, their how they dressed the next day, and the students did not bat an eyelid. They did not bat an eyelid. So I find generally that young people are, as a whole, as a collective, seem to be far more open to diversity than their elders.
And this is great news, isn't it?
Yeah. Whereas, but the thing is, a lot is run the system. So that's where the issue lies. It's more those who may have had a different experience in their coming up than what the young people have now. So you still get, of course, you get ignorance in young people, and we, you know, as a school, as someone who's worked in many schools, that's been dealt with obviously variably depending on the adults. But generally, when I look at these things, it's the adults who have the biggest issue, and that's not all the teachers or all of it, but perhaps even those who write the policies, or those who really saying these are expectations and following through on the expectations of what we're supposed to have with the British values, with the protected characteristics, and those making it very clear we do not tolerate this here, and we will accept, you know, these things. Then whatever that is, then when we get to that place, then things will be a lot better. But that's the issue.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about things like the RSC curriculum or things like that, because I know there's been lots of discussion around the RSC curriculum and what maybe culturally people may not be comfortable with within their belief system, because people are allowed to opt out of that. But I'm just talking about generally in terms of young people being open and adults letting go of their biases in order for society to function at a lot better level.
Absolutely. I think you're right there. You know, we've seen on social media and in the media, no one is born a bigot. You are taught these kind of values, etc., and behaviors, and it is kind of up to educators to try and change people's opinions. But I think you're completely right in terms of how young people's attitudes are changing. I've seen that quite a lot in terms of, when I think back when I was at school, now that was, 20 years ago, I was outed and I had an awful experience, but I see things now where people are coming out and it's the norm. Malika, you were talking to me the other day about a student who came out as trans at school and it was completely welcomed. Now, which is great. And I can think of another example. Now, this is it's not the same scale. It talks about equality where, a school decided that female students couldn't wear trousers. And it was like, what, we were forced to wear skirts, or it was one of those skirts were part of the uniform. So then there was a group of boys who said, well, we'll wear skirts then. And it just goes to show how the young people's minds are very much different. And it's great to see that over the next few times and in generations, society will change again, won't it? And it'll be in a much more open and understanding society. Would you, as educators, would you both agree to that? Malika, do you want to go first?
Yeah, 100%. I agree 100% with what Adrian said as well. That's precisely the reason why I'm in education, because I know that's where I can make a difference. I can make that difference there, in education, passing on the knowledge I've got, the expertise, and talking about the, living, breathing the British values, as a person who's who's become British. You know, I've embraced Britishness, and I've been in this country long enough that I did everything I needed to do to gain British citizenship, you know, including jumping through all the hoops and the cost of it. And, you know, I know British values, I embrace them, you know, I live and breathe them. And this is exactly what I want to see, you know, in society, as opposed to that proclaimed Britishness by those opposed to British values and who are a threat to British values. Youngsters are very, very accepting of others. They are, you know, and as Adrian said, you know, like Adrian said, that example, people don't bat an eyelid. Who cares? They said, you know, you're this way one day and you come out the next day because of who you are and you feel you can do it. They don't bat an eyelid. They don't care. They just don't care. They don't care about your color. They don't care about your ethnicity, your accent. I've not been questioned once about my accent. Obviously, during the Brexit referendum in the Brexit voting enclaves, yes, I have. You know, I have been at the receiving end of all of that. But nowadays, youngsters just don't care. They don't bat an eyelid. You know, and actually, it's probably the perceptions from their environments really that are making perhaps them act in the way that they are sometimes, you know, making the wrong choices. Is probably an environmental thing. But once you educate a young person and you show them the different things, you know, different sides of the argument, you offer them balance, they're able to make their own choices, and hopefully the positive ones that we all want to see. So I agree entirely that youngsters is where it's at. You know, you've got to, you know, you can't change. A bigot is always going to be a bigot. You know, let's face it. I'm done trying to talk to bigots. I'm done. And I'm done trying to be the person on the other side, trying to so-called have a debate with bigots, when actually all you are is just a token. You know, there's this tokenism that is also there, where you wheel out a person of color, you know, like myself or anybody, and you just put them in front of a bigot and you make them justify their experience to the bigot. I'm done with all of that. That's not where I'm at anymore.
I think I can completely relate, Malika, and obviously I think there's still a lot of work to be done. Obviously, from my own experiences, obviously I do passionately attend Pride events. Now, I don't necessarily go to the celebration side of it in terms of, like, you know, the ticketed events or whatever, but I definitely very much take part in the parades, because obviously that is we're enabling our voice, because there's still a lot of work to do. And you know, when you talk about bigotry there, you know, I've seen in the parades where you have points where, you know, you have people out there and with their signs, and, you know, we embrace that now. I think it's absolutely hilarious if you ever see it on the news, where, you know, you have this flamboyant LGBT person kind of next to a sign with it, you know, generally an anti-religious sign. So it's quite interesting how there's still a lot of way to do. Now, Adrian, let's bring you back in here in terms of, like, your experiences from educator, but more focusedly, like, what can we do as a society if we're going to take some learning from this? What could we do to kind of stop unconscious bias happening, or enabling people to just stop and think?
I think your answer is actually in the question, because you're saying, what can we learn? I think the whole thing is to learn. To stop unconscious bias, to stop any bias, you have to learn. You have to be prepared to learn. And that takes investment of time and energy to do that. And the problem if we go back to the report that came out recently, that's kind of put things back, because firstly, the research was flawed. The response from it shows that it was flawed. And also, when you put out things which are, in my mind, counterproductive, it doesn't help anything, because you're essentially trying to sweep things under the carpet. And the only way you can find things out is by investing time and energy to learn. And you will not necessarily get that from the general media, whether it's from a particular newspaper or another one, because what you might be inclined to do is have something that's view. I'm firmly of the belief that the majority of the media is owned by people who have strong biases. So therefore, how are you going to get information from them? So what you have to do is do your independent research and go and find out. One thing I was very proud of, irrespective of how people try to, you know, to make a negative about the BLM protests last year, the overwhelming majority of those were very peaceful. And when I think about where I live in Derby, my daughter went to the protest with her friends, and like I say, it was probably a 50-50 split, if not a bigger, in terms of there was more white young people than there was young black people, because there's more young white people in Derby than there is young black people. And that told me a lot, because there were young people who were saying it is not fair. And I think that's where the young people are more prepared to learn than the older people. And that's where people have to be prepared to learn and not just be dismissive of what is in front of them, because the stats don't lie. And the real stats are, if we take, for example, in education, there is a disproportionate amount of people of color who lead schools. That's not an accident. That's not because black people are lazy or whatever it is, whatever kind of thing you want to put in it, or haven't got the level of education. All of us in education have an education. So
yeah.
let's just park that rubbish and be open and actually listen, and really listen, not hear, listen. And listen. In order to listen, you have to be prepared to learn.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with what you're saying about the media as well, because, you know, that is not your source. I mean, generally in society, that is a source of information. I think we've learned over the past 12 months what to kind of read into news. Do you make your own research? But as you mentioned, you know, media is aligned to certain things. You know, all the British media are aligned to a political party in a sort of the way they present, acknowledge political views, etc. I found that quite interesting. I mean, I was aware of it, but I've really kind of looked into it over the past few months and kind of go, oh my gosh, actually, yeah, if you read it, that does sound very left wing, or that does sound very right wing, and it's quite interesting, really. And I think, again, learning is right. You know, it's just about taking that concept and looking at it yourself. And BLM last year, I think, really highlighted that in terms of how people took that into approach. And, you know, we've seen that again most recently, you know, in Bristol, is you know, with the policing bill that's been presented. And it's just like, society does have a voice, and they will use that voice. And the fact people are trying to stop that voice from happening will even demonstrate even further about, you know, again, going back to those British values and saying that we do have that right, etc. I think what we need to, I think we're going to bring that to a conclusion there. And I think I really just want to say thank you to Adrian for giving up his time the past hour or so, just having that conversation with. It's really, I always love talking to you. The whole 3 times that I've spoken to you, I learn quite a lot. But I think, you know, it's an opportunity for me and Malika to kind of reflect on the first season, isn't it?
Yes, 100%. And again, Adrian, huge thanks for coming on. And I know it takes a lot of guts to come on and discuss, you know, the issues in education, because often, as a fellow person in education, I know that a lot of things are taboo. You know, you're not meant to be saying certain things, because if you do, ultimately it will tank your career and it can hijack your prospects. And so kudos to you for coming on to talk about this, because I know it's not easy to do that. And I do say, you know, and as we all said, that this will encourage people to learn more, and to learn that by standing together, united, we're stronger. And at the moment, there is too much of that division that takes place, and we need to learn that actually we all are united, and we should look at each other and connect those dots. I always go back to my connecting the dots analogy, which is one I've been using every single episode, because I really feel that we've been isolated dots, really divided. And we need to turn that tide, and only by having these conversations will we all learn from one another and move forward. And I would finish perhaps with one note and pass on to you, Adrian, for the final word today, really, is that obviously we have celebrated the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King, and you know, I always have this in my head, you know, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can. And that's the thing that keeps me going, you know, be that light and continue to be that light. And I thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. You can't drive darkness with darkness. It has to be with light. And also, thinking about within education, there are a whole heap of people within education who are really passionate around this matter and around equity and fairness. And to those, I say thank you. And the other thing is, you know, as educators, as much as it's our job to educate young people, it's also our job to be learners as well. And as long as we're prepared to be learners, then the only way, you know, the only thing that can happen is that it benefits the students. And sometimes people forget that's what we're in it for. And, you know, making sure that we have the right people in the right place to make sure that happens without any bias.
So Malika, wow, that was a really, really insightful conversation we've had for the past about an hour with Adrian, haven't we?
Yeah, really, really powerful. Yeah, I'm kind of like hoping that people will watch it without prejudice, and people will actually try and take forward some of the things that have been said, about learning to do the work on yourself, and understanding really that, yeah, we can't afford to be divided more than we already are anymore.
Absolutely not. And I think it's been really useful, because this is the end of our first season, isn't it, as well?
Yes, it is, and I think that was such a powerful note to end on, don't you? Because for this season, we talked about so much, didn't we? We covered mental health, we covered COVID, we covered HIV, which was really, really powerful again. We had so many powerful guests on, and I'm really grateful to all of them for coming on to share their experiences with us.
I do thank actually, a lot, as we said at the very beginning, we set out to make 8 episodes, and now we've done 11. And it's been really useful. We must thank all our friends, like you've just said, to support us in this first season, because, Adrian spoke about before that it's all about learning. And actually, we've done something that we've wanted to do, and we've had to learn. I know we keep saying to ourselves in the introductions that I'm in Manchester, you're in Norwich, and I think it's really powerful when we say that, isn't it?
Yeah, because even though we are distant, we are very proximate. There you go. There's my degree joined there again. Some of my
we
social
finally used our qualification.
Yeah, and it's true. We are very close, and we can be very close despite the distance. And this is what it's all about, really. These human connections, isn't it? And we've learned to be. For me, this journey has been about perhaps laying myself bare more than I wanted to at times.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing to do, when you've kind of like learned to perhaps hide away at times. Does that make sense? And now I'm all out here in the open doing this with you. But that's the beauty of it, is that you've been able to that friendship I've got with you is so strong that I'm able to do that. And that's perhaps learning there, part of me, that is learning to trust perhaps my friends that I've got, and knowing who they are. And I thank you for that, for embarking on this journey.
I thank you for being a part of this journey as well. I mean, I think we talked in episode 1, we haven't seen each other since 2018, but it's the power of social media and networking, the fact that in virtual worlds, the fact that we've been able to keep in touch. We've always wanted to do this project, and actually now, with the little support from Sarah, we've been able to just force ourselves to do it. And actually, I feel really rewarded and adjusted the fact that we've done it, because I've learned so much. And we have the conversations in between, to get them set up, and we get worried about kind of, are we doing the right thing? And actually, well, we both said, if no one listens to this or watches this, it's like, well, it's our platform to get out, and we do hope people are engaging, but it's our way of actually talking about issues that impact us as humans, and how we could potentially support the wider society to kind of make change themselves. Is that, would you agree that that's what we're doing?
100%. Yes, I agree 100%. I think, yeah, you summarized it really well here. I think that having this platform where people are safe also to speak about it, because I wouldn't necessarily, and I've done my fair share of speaking on public platforms, and I don't feel safe doing that anymore. I do not feel safe doing that anymore. And this is a platform for us where we are providing that safe opportunity for these conversations that are important to us to take place. And I agree 100% with what you said. And I really thank you for being on that journey with me. Absolutely. And perhaps pushing me a little bit along the way as well.
Definitely. I don't think I could have done this with anyone else but you, Malika, if I'm being completely honest. So thank you for being part of this journey. Now, we are going to wrap this thing. We're going to wrap things up very shortly. Now, we have alluded to season 2 in some of the episodes. Now, if people are asking or wondering when they're going to be out, now, Malika has said we're not too sure. We're hopefully going to aim towards the end of the summer, because obviously, as everyone knows, Malika is a teacher. So hopefully we'll give some time for us to do some recordings, but things are just as busy for me as well. So, we're going to say for now, this has been the conversation. Thank you for listening to us so far, and we hope you will listen to us again in the very near future.
Indeed. Thank you very much for being part of this journey with us. And I hope you learned something. I hope it's been positive for you and productive. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.